I've told you often that if you want to test your worldview, the best way to do it is to see if you can predict things. So I've made a number of predictions. Some you've seen, some you don't know about, I'll tell you about. And I test them. So I'm going to test them right now. And what I found is that I have a bad track record on, let's say, ordinary stuff. Like if just some ordinary person is running for office and I try to predict who's going to win, I'm not especially good at that because there's nothing there that works to my special knowledge. But if there's somebody in the race or in the world who has special persuasion skills, I probably have a little advantage there because I can recognize them. For example, as you know, I identified Trump as being persuasive and likely to win the presidential election before other people. And I also noticed AOC as having a special skill when most people were calling her a flash in the pan and a bartender and stuff like that. And now she's practically running the Democratic Party. So I seem to be good in certain categories. But let me tell you some of the least, let's say the wildest predictions I've ever made and see how I've done on the most unusual ones, okay? In my book, The Dilbert Future, that was published in 1997, I made a prediction that still catches me flack 20-some years later. And the prediction was this, that evolution would be debunked in my lifetime in scientific terms, not in religious terms. So I never said that evolution would be debunked in favor of, Genesis, but I did say that science would debunk evolution in my lifetime. Has that happened? Yes. Now, when I say debunked, that's of course a strong term, but it is true that there is an alternate explanation of evolution that is backed by a small number, but real scientists. Nick Bostrom, who's I believe a scientist, is the one who came up with it. And it certainly would make evolution, not applicable. So imagine how wild that prediction was. The entire scientific community was saying, no, we scientists all agree for the most part, evolution. And I publicly predicted against that, not in terms of a religious explanation, but as a scientific one. Here was my thinking. My thinking is, specifically, and here's the reason I gave for why I thought it would be rethought. I said that the next 100 years will be a search for better perception instead of better vision. In other words, my prediction about evolution was based on our perception of our reality. And that's what simulation theory is. It's about a perception of our reality. It's not about whether this fossil is real. It's not about, whether DNA can mutate. It was about whether our entire perception of reality would be transformed. So that was in 1997. I made that prediction. Not bad. All right. I also predicted in the same book that virtual reality in the form of something like the holodeck would make real sex extinct. And as I just mentioned, just regular porn that's not yet even 3D, for the most part, has lowered men's interest in having sex with real women substantially, enough that some are considering it an emergency. What happens when this level of porn moves into the 3D world? Well, if you have not experienced virtual reality, and I've got a virtual reality box over here. If you've not experienced how real it feels, even while your brain knows it's not real, but you see the world like it's real. If you haven't experienced that in person, you don't know how bad this is going to get. Let me tell you, whatever level the porn addiction / crisis is right now, you haven't seen anything. It's going to take a whole new level, and it's going to make sex with humans seem like a stupid idea. That's happening. All right, and there's nothing you can do to change that. There's nothing that would change that. So I think that prediction certainly has the indication that it's happening. I made a weird prediction, also in 1997, that there would be a rise of something that I call the hairy reasoners. Now, Harry Reasoner was a real person. He was a news guy back in the old 60 Minutes, original days. He's passed away. But it was a play on words. Instead of Harry like a person's name, I referred to them as hairy, as in the hair on your head. And the thought was that on the internet, there would rise a number of, let's say, voices or pundits who would have bad hair and would come to be sort of the voices of reason. And the prediction was that we wouldn't be able to discern our reality from the news, because the news wouldn't be reliable. 1997, folks. And I said that instead of relying on the news for the truth, you would need certain people who would emerge just as credible figures that would have bad hair, but they'd be good at explaining stuff. That's exactly what I'm doing. I've got bad hair, and I'm good at explaining stuff. Somebody just said Alan Dershowitz. Exactly. Somebody said Joe Rogan. Exactly. Bad hair, good at explaining stuff. I was going to say Jordan Peterson, but he actually has excellent hair, but he has a beard. I don't remember if I said in the book that they would be hairy in that way. But it is true that Levin. It is true, it seems, that Cernovich has good hair. He's a bad example. Malcolm Gladwell. Yeah, Malcolm Gladwell. So not all of the important figures who are explaining things have bad hair, but I'm going to claim partial victory on that one. I also predicted in the early 2000s, that there would be a caliphate in the Middle East. There was. And that they would be using drones for, small drones for terrorist attacks. I think that's guaranteed. I also predicted in this book, years ago, that the news industry would start killing celebrities to generate news. And I predicted that the actual news would be so positive that we would figure out how to make stuff work pretty well in the future, that the news industry would have to actually start creating news by killing people. That was shortly before Princess Di died trying to avoid photographers. So I'm not going to say that proved it, but we are watching the news trying to assassinate people's careers. Wouldn't you say that it's true that the news industry, especially the news on the left, is literally assassinating people, at least politically and career-wise, to generate news? Would you say that's not true? Are you watching it every day? The news is not physically killing people in most cases, but they're actually targeting people for destruction to make news. It gets clicks. That's almost all we're watching now, is the news targeting and destroying people to create more news. Think about that. I predicted in 97 that video cameras would be so ubiquitous that it would be impossible to get away with crime. Almost there. When was the last time you saw a crime that involved any kind of a public event or business in which there were not video cameras? It almost never happens anymore. So that one was correct. I also made that weird prediction that Hillary's health was bad during the election. Now, that was a pretty bold thing to say. And she's the only candidate I know who, during the election, passed out at a public event, had to be dragged into a car. And there's more to the story that's rumored, but that's not confirmed. But apparently she was pretty darn sick. So a few people were on the same page on that one. I predicted, of course, back in 2016, I said that the two movies on one screen was what we were about to see. And I said that reality itself would be changed by Trump. True? It's true, wouldn't you say? I think that, in fact, there was just yet another article, I think, in the New York Times in which somebody was saying exactly the same thing, that our world has separated into two versions of reality. Think about what a weird prediction that was in 2016. I literally predicted that reality would split into two movies that are playing on the same screen, meaning we'd look at the same facts, but we'd see different movies. Think how weird that was when I said it. And now it's literally ordinary. Like everybody agrees it's true. When I first said it, I don't think anybody thought it would be true. That's about as contrarian a prediction as anybody's ever made in the history of predictions. Here's another contrarian one. When the Vegas shooting happened and ISIS claimed that it was an ISIS event, I said in public it wasn't ISIS. At the same time, ISIS was actually taking credit for it, and the experts said, ISIS doesn't take credit for stuff unless it's really them. And I said, this will be the exception. And it was. Think how weird that was. ISIS was taking credit, and I still said in public, it's not them. And then we found out it wasn't. Remember the Cuban sonic weapon? I said it's not a sonic weapon when everybody said it's a sonic weapon. At least everybody I know of. Maybe somebody thought it wasn't. And sure enough, years have gone by and they can't find any sonic weapon, as I predicted. And somebody gave me a hard time because I predicted that Kamala Harris would be the nominee for the Democrats, and she's already dropped out of the race or suspended her campaign. But am I wrong yet? Let me just suggest that if Kamala Harris became Joe Biden's running mate, that people are going to look at that situation, especially since Joe is talking about having only one term. And the reason he's talking about that is because if we see more of him, and you'd have to in the general election, once it reaches the general election, the news will no longer be able to ignore Joe Biden. And he's going to look less and less appealing until his vice presidential running mate is being talked of as, wait for it, the real nominee. Because people are going to say, Joe is technically the head of the ticket, but we're kind of voting for the vice president in this specific case. That would make Kamala Harris effectively the nominee without getting nominated. It might not happen, but I'm just saying that my prediction about her being the nominee is not yet dead, except in the technical sense in which it is. Somebody says, your predictions are often wrong. Well, I covered that in the first part you might have missed. So when my predictions are wrong, they're usually in certain categories. So the ones that tend to be wrong are sort of ordinary things like which ordinary candidate will win this race, which way will a vote go, stuff like that. I don't think I have any special insight in that stuff. But in terms of understanding reality and the trends of how we see our world and persuasion, I seem to have a good record there. And you would still lose the bet, that is correct. Yeah, even if Kamala Harris were vice president that everybody thought should be president, I would still technically lose the bet.